Welcome. It's the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from our respective quarantine corners with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Welcome to the show, everybody. Wishing everybody health and safety in this horrifying and brutal time for so many. Joining us on this week's program, Professor Richard Wolff. The Cataclysm of Capitalism, COVID, and where we are today. Then Chris Smalls, he's organizing against Amazon, and we are having his back. Amazon boycotts, holding not only companies to account, but the entire country, the entire economy to account, as this crisis has been used to consolidate capital and rob the 99% blind. We're talking about his organizing, his story, how we can help. Incredibly excited about that. Observe the boycott, folks. And of course, we have a gem with David G. David, how are you going to bring Johnny Cash into this?
That'd be a good move. Maybe in the future, we should do a deep dive into the classics, outlaw country, honestly.
We should do an illicit history of that. Folks, in addition to that, we will talk about why Kerala has an effective people-centered response to this crisis. Kerala communism, the Kerala Communist Party in India, is actually one of the most successful governing projects in the world. And they're having some real success in a people-centered, decentralized response to Corona. In the postgame, Ben Burgess takes on the idea of a Joe Biden national unity government. Joshua Kahn has some rebel music history for us, and we are talking about the Caribbean community standing strong against the next wave of U.S. belligerence and coup-mongering in Venezuela. President Lula leading against Bolsonaro, as Bolsonaro's own health minister will not follow his demands and his whines that people leave their quarantines. The Trump administration, this is just a giant scam opportunity for all of them. We're going to talk about that. And the New York radio legend has a couple of minutes of lucidity, which he regrets, but we still want to give him some props for. Mike got Mad Dog about his call out of the Trump administration. All that and much, much more in the post game. But first, I want to talk about the need for localism and how the localism movement, a localist, resilient politics can fit into a project that synchronizes planetary solidarity, empathy, global interdependence, the basic demands of national social democracies, delivering healthcare, housing, and other absolute necessities for all citizens, and also a empowered local politics that can help generate independence and safety for vital systems, food, medical supplies, energy, and more. The coronavirus has destroyed our illusions about the safety and the desirability of abstracted global supply chains. Let's look at this, what's happened over the past several weeks in particular, including a report from Reuters on disrupted global food chains in India. Limitations of travel have led to massive waste. Dairy farmers are being forced to dump milk. Planting windows are being missed, and the shortage of labor means that many crops are likely to rot and remain unpicked. This could lead and will lead to food shortages. It will damage labor prospects, and as always, threaten the livelihoods and well-being of already pressed small farmers who are already sort of threatened, not sort of, deeply threatened by agricultural monopolies and governmental policies that do not favor them. The problem isn't limited to food either. We see in the United States the lack of essential resources in terms of medical supplies, medicine, and other areas in which the United States has no national, a very limited national and local capacity to produce what it needs. This all goes back to decades of corporate written trade policies that have sought to undermine national independence, cheapen labor, destroy labor unions, and IMF and World Bank packages that have demanded that developing countries not create any self-sustaining industries of their own in either key national strategic areas or in local communities and in areas of expertise such as agriculture. Across the globe, the pursuit of cash crop uses up the best land for export while locals are malnourished. And we are seeing, of course, as I say again, the devastating cost of our inability to produce our own medical supplies in the United States, thanks to trade agreements like PNTR with China that was passed in the late 1990s. Now, we need to reprioritize the local in this. Of course, I'll keep emphasizing there's a profoundly important, urgent role and necessity of recognizing that we are globally interdependent, that there's no Chinese virus, there's no African virus, there's no American virus. This sort of garbage xenophobic thinking is antithetical to the shared endeavor of to protect humanity through collective scientific efforts, medical innovation, coordination, and extraordinary acts of solidarity like Cuba's doctors. Nation states have the responsibility to provide every single person in their polity, healthcare, housing, clean water, food, and more. Obviously, the United States so devastated and so behind in all of these vital areas. But now we also need to reprioritize a notion of localism that is empowered and democratic. Renegade thinkers in the 1970s, like E.F. Schumacher and Ivan Illich, emphasized human-centered systems and critiqued bureaucracies, both public and private, that took away capacity building in agriculture and education and replaced it with standardized and mass process. It was a critique not of the notion of development entirely, but of the idea of bringing in top-down structures that robbed people of local agency and said that people's innate capacities, traditional systems, lacked any value and can be destroyed by the march of capital and bureaucratic development. In a contemporary world, we have Michelle Bowens at the Peer-to-Peer Foundation and people like Jeremy Johnson, who's been on this show, and Brent Cooper, and people involved in something called the meta-modern movement. Now, I don't agree with all of the ideas in this movement, but I do know that there's some very, very, very important things they're exploring, including recentering the idea of the commons. Of course, Marx talked about the enclosure of the commons. We've done a history of that with Richard Wolff. The notion of broad public expanses of land which had to be commodified and made private in order for the formation of modern capitalism. Common resources cover a huge amount of area of human value, ecological, technological, and artistic, that exist inside and outside of markets as well as government. They really are their own sort of third sector platform. And there's a huge amount that can be done in a local level to reclaim the commons and create more resiliency. Things like community-supported agriculture, people working in common agricultural collectives, initiatives to reassert the need for municipally owned and locally distributed energy sources, building more capacity locally. This can also fit with the more technological focus of folks like Aaron Bastani. As an example, if we use 3D printing in a effective and smart way, it could immediately change the paradigm of medical production, drug production, and other vital areas, and again, create that local capacity building. This, and we'll see this actually in some of the success of Carola later, also cannot be separated from a fundamentally democratic ethos. We're not talking about simply local capitalism. We're not talking about making micro exploitation. We're talking about the role of localism in a broader democratization and empowerment of the economy. And this is also a very important way of looking at it from a Marxist perspective, that when we understand that, of course, there's a fundamental need for government regulation and things like that in our modern circumstances. There's no way of getting around that. But that the ultimate aim of this politics is emancipatory and empowering in the broadest sense. And that's going to include people organizing in their polities and taking control of their regional networks to generate more democratic outcome. Capitalism tends towards monopoly systemically. There's a reason why local production has been replaced by global production and profit seeking. However, we can recognize that while capitalism disempowers us from taking important decisions, that our lack of local planning and inability to produce locally comes from the dominance of major corporations and unnecessarily complex systems whose only goal is profit. We need to be talking about using local social and political movements to rebuild our capacities for production and connect those industries and systems to broader global efforts to reorient the economy. Every site is a site of struggle, and we need a local movements as much as we need national and international ones. It's not either or. We need to fight on every battlefield, and the local has been neglected for far too long. Again, global interdependence, national social democracy, and local resilience with a through line of, in the fullest sense of both words, democratic socialism girding all of these movements. Does that make sense, guys? Do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
I just wanted to highlight something that's very important, that people understand, that when we're talking about localism, that not to fetishize, for example, small versus large, rather to focus on community power, democratic control over the control of the few. So, when we're talking about, for example, how ridiculous our food system is, where there's large places across, for example, like the Horn of Africa, where people are malnourished, living right next to very, very good soil, because that land is being used to produce cash crops that are exported. Right. And it's about taking back control over like the regions around us so that we can better provide for ourselves and provide for communities instead of just for profit seeking. So when we're talking about, and also just the kind of anarchic world that we're living in today, where there's actually a very few amount of suppliers that supply major cities like New York City, all across the country. Our food systems are controlled by a few major corporations, and there's no reason that we should not have more local agriculture. So it's not about fetishizing small versus large. It's about saying that we need more democratic control over our society and over our economy, and reclaiming the local that has been completely devastated by global capitalism is a massive and very crucial first step.
Yes. And also, Matt, and also it is very important. And as I'm kind of digging back into this literature, again, particularly Small is Beautiful and E.F. Schumacher's work on books like Deschooling Society, which I'll talk about more, there's flaws in these models. There's no doubt about it, as there's flaws in every model. But there is actually something very important, I think, about also reasserting the idea that when these modes of production came in and completely wiped away old systems, that basically saying, as an example, I'll make it, concrete, that like the work on the commons, everybody should think of this essay called The Tragedy of the Commons by Garrett Hardin, which is one of the worst pieces of writing ever, right? And the notion, it was a piece in the late 60s, was that if the commons are not regulated by a private market, they will be despoiled. They will be destroyed. And it's a really interesting move, because what you're discounting, and again, I understand that some people, this is not about romanticizing local production or First Nations people or anything like that. Every society is flawed. Everything has problems. but it is very significant when you realize that both from the perspective of private capital, but also a lot of efforts of like eco-preservation has been built on an assumption that, oh, this group doesn't know how to manage its own resources. Let's get in and control it for them. Whether it's because we're doing something like, I mean, we see right now, we see like bioprospecting. You were talking about Africa earlier. Countries like Saudi going into Africa and pre-buying plots of land and trying to have access to food and water and things like that for when they run out of things, right? But also, we see this in a lot of controversies around like eco-preservation that don't have legitimate partnerships with local partners, essentially. So my point is that these frameworks also help recognize that there is something very damaging about completely delegitimizing multiple systems of agriculture, as an example, multiple systems of how to govern the commons. And while not romanticizing, we have to recognize that this broader capitalist project is also synchronized with homogenizing how we do everything. And one of the benefits of a healthy localism is that there is sort of an innate diversity of production and ideas, because you're decentralizing certain things enough, where that can happen. And I think that does need to happen in things like food, agriculture, energy, and elsewhere. And the really exciting thing now is that it can be synchronized with technical innovation as well. If you actually use 3D printing in an effective way, that could actually be a significant change in pharmaceutical production, as an example.
Just real quick, I agree with you completely, especially the homogenization and what happens with that. Like there's a project in South Carolina called Anson Mills, where they're actually trying to revive a lot of the old rices and the old beans and the old flours and all the old crops that have been completely devastated by a monoculture, where we're growing the same kind of rice all around the world, and it's destroying indigenous and more ancient and more diverse versions of food stuff. So like there's a lot of people who are doing that work, and it has to cut across against the market, because that's not the most profitable way to operate. But if we're making conscientious efforts, we can preserve those and and expand and have a more interesting and healthier food supply. I think that's exactly the kind of way that we need to be thinking about it. We should be involved in the decision. Do we want to live in a society where all the rice is the same kind of variety across the world? No, we want to have more options and healthier rice, all of these different things. I mean, these are the kind of decisions that we're just left out of. It's fundamentally, it's a question of democracy.
Yeah, it's funny. I know I've been on my colonial studies kick, and you look at just the original dispossession sort of rationales, which is you aren't improving the land, Native Americans, so we're going to take better advantage of it. Mm-hmm. But, we're having this issue of like the short-term horizon of corporations and the profit motive. Well, back then it was the same case, where it's like if you look at it over the course of like 20 years, because they didn't exhaust the land and like the nutrients inside it, they rotated it in a much smarter way. It was actually way more profitable in the long term than, the immediate just get every little bit of potassium out of it.
Look what cotton did to the South.
Right.
And these examples are still really like, these are still playing out today in monocultures and things like that, which have enormous ecological consequences, but are also really, really damaging to farmers, as an example. Globally. I want to also, I'll hat tip also Vantana Shiva's work here is important with this. Let's Matt, can you tell Professor Wolff we'll get to him right at 7:29 or 7:30, and we'll just do a shout out of both the Teamster thing and Kerala and a little pitch. But let's start with just a little bit of a reflection on Kerala, India. So Kerala is a really interesting state in general politically. It's governed, its chief minister is governed by the Communist Party of India, and it's really a state that for a very long time, like going back to the victory of independence, has really strongly emphasized social welfare networks, and it's always been not only outperformed the rest of India, but outperformed a lot of the rest of sort of comparable places in the world, maybe even more developed places in, delivery of things like healthcare. Maybe just scroll down a bit. This piece, look, this piece came out a couple days ago. Obviously, it's a fluid situation, but I do want to just acknowledge this piece in Huffington Post and talk a little bit about Kerala. This was as of 3 days ago. While Kerala still has 286 cases behind Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra, with 309 and 423 positive cases, its death toll is comparatively low, 2 deaths as compared to 26 in Maharashtra. The state has won praise for its adept handling of the pandemic that has killed more than 50,000 people around the world and overwhelmed health systems in even resource-rich countries like the obscene, disgusting shithole United States. This has occurred even though a southern state faces challenges such as high population density, high proportion of the elderly, 12.6 of the total population, who are particularly vulnerable to disease, and financial constraints following 2 floods and a I don't even know what that is, a earlier virus outbreak several years ago. Can we keep scrolling down? Yeah, I'll just read a little bit here now. Okay, right. Yeah, I keep forgetting. I'm not controlling this. The Pinarayi Vijayan led government's response to the COVID-19 outbreak provides a glimpse of what goes into building a robust response to public health crisis of this magnitude. In the past few weeks, the government has instituted much praised interventions, such as providing logistical support to quarantine people to buy supplies, counseling and better internet data packages for those in isolation, and soap and hand sanitizers at bus stations and at the entrance to public buildings. Like, we don't have this stuff in New York City. Mm-hmm. Okay. All these steps, which address individual level impediments to sustain the preventative measure, crucial to checking the spread of new infections, exemplify the application of scientific knowledge with empathy. That is such a key line right there. And I'll just read a touch more. Further, the government's efforts at a transparent communication, press conferences every evening, coupled with tangible relief measures addressing livelihood and food security concerns, speak of public health wisdom that, go down a little bit, that focuses on inspiring social solidarity and up a little bit. Sorry. On public health wisdom that focuses on inspiring social solidarity and trust to encourage an informed public cooperation. For the crisis of this magnitude, Kerala's response might be among the best examples of a respectful, sustainable, and harmonious public health intervention at a large scale. And then they go in, and we can't go into all of it, but it really does this piece does a really good job of going back from the 1950s to the 1980s, that this state government in Kerala already did an enormous amount of work in public healthcare infrastructure and welfare generally. And that under the leadership of the Communist Party in Kerala, there was also a lot of initiatives back on the localism of community participation and governance, local democratic structures, different aspects of citizen participation and decision making. And that this robustness, the social robustness, as well as genuinely more humanitarian attitude, has made Kerala obviously significantly better positioned than the rest of India and Brooklyn. So I wanted to just shout that out. We'll tweet that out later. It's a really, really good piece and a great example, again, of this real-time policy comparison. Do we have this Teamsters thing?
Yeah.
Let's throw that up. This is important stuff. Okay, so this is we have an opportunity here to help UPS Teamsters protect themselves and the public from COVID-19. I was really honored to get reached out by one of the organizers of this. And as we all know, all delivery people are risking their lives during this and, of course, not getting taken care of by their companies. I'll read from the GoFundMe and we will tweet this out. And if you can, obviously, this is all if you can. But if you're in a position, this is an incredibly important thing to support for labor empowerment right now. While millions of Americans are quarantined in their homes, UPS workers are on the job and in the public every day, making sure hospitals and homebound are getting critical supplies. UPS workers are organizing to protect themselves from COVID-19, and we need your help. Your donation can help save lives and protect workers and communities. UPS makes billions in profits. They can track a package anywhere around the globe, but they won't track down sanitizer, masks, and gloves that UPS workers need to keep safe. Many of us use company bathrooms that don't even have soap or hand sanitizer. This needs to stop. That is so disgusting. We are raising donations to fund a grassroots campaign to make UPS management provide PPE like sanitizers, gloves, masks that will save lives of workers and the public. That's right. I mean, your packages are not safe as long as UPS is doing this. Tell employees if they've been exposed to COVID-19 in our workplace, maintain health care even if we were laid off because of the economic crisis. The UPS Teamsters United is an independent grassroots network of UPS workers. We won't get a penny of funding from UPS or the union. Our grassroots movement is growing. We're informing and uniting tens of thousands of UPS workers and getting our stories into the media and getting results. All right, guys, if you can, donate something. And if you can't, use your social media platform. This stuff is important as hell. I'll say really quick, as always, guys, if you can, if you're in a position, this is a very good time to jump on and become a patron. Patreon.com/TMBS. We still need to keep growing and paying all of our bills and getting everybody's, salaries and things like that. And, the importance of this work and how we're doing it, I'll say unabashedly, is only going to increase. And we're obviously, if anybody needs a deal, we're giving everybody, the deals they need. And so if you're in a position, some people are kind of upping their membership level to help, sustain that. Go for it and go become a patron. And we appreciate all of you immensely. If you're watching this, smash the like button. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe. Go check out our playlists. There's a huge amount of political education, particularly for patrons, but really for everyone, because we open up a huge amount of content, do a lot of content. During these main shows, we don't get to super chat questions. That's when we do our live streams. But of course, if you hit us with a super chat, that also helps a ton. So if you're in a position to do any of those things, do so. You can also buy my book at Red Emma's. They're putting out their first shipment next week, Against the Web, Cosmopolitan Answer to the New Right, and support a great independent bookstore as we all boycott Amazon. Folks, I think we're almost ready for Professor Richard Wolff. Is he going to be here in a moment? Yeah, let's bring him on. Oh, okay. Here he is. Tell us, Professor Wolff, are you there?
Connects for a second.
Let them know. Let them know that they're. Professor Wolff, are you there?
I am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is a strange time that we're living in.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, this is taken. One thing I actually appreciate is the question, how are you, has become a real question. So how are you, Professor Wolff?
Well, I've gone to a country location to be safe, to be pretty isolated. And so far, so good. I'm hoping that I escape with my wife and part of my family so that we're in a position to keep it going. And we have so far been able to continue to produce our program and ship it around, the electronic world being what it is. I'm sure you're doing the same. And it's a bit of a miracle that we can continue to function. But for the moment, we're doing it.
Right. So, you can never predict the specific form it's going to come in, but you have been saying it's coming. A major rock to the economy, another violent spasm of capitalism. And what I'd like you to do, if you can, is, are they separated? We have a public health crisis. That's just here. Even in a much more advanced society, it would happen. But the response to it, particularly in the United States, the absolute failure to get it under control, the bailout as an enormous theft and consolidation of monopoly capital. What does that tell you in terms of where you think we're at in the overall picture of the crisis of capitalism?
Okay, let me try to tell you. I've been working on it and thinking about it and basically obsessing about trying to answer that question. So here's the best I can do, at least so far. We are 20 years, not even, into a new century. In that 20 years, we have had 3 crashes of capitalism. We had the so-called dot-com crisis early in 2000. We then had the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008 and 9. And here we are with the coronavirus crisis in 2020. I understand why those crises have those names. The major reason, in my judgment, that they have those names is a desperate effort to focus everyone's attention on the external cause of these 3 crises in 20 years. By the way, the dot-com crisis was serious, but relatively short-lived. The 2008 crisis was so bad, the second worst in the history of capitalism, that it got the name the Great Recession. This one, we already know, will be worse than the Great Recession, and the only question is, will it be worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s? So the basic punchline of what I'm getting at is, the old joke, it takes 2 to tango. In order to have an economic crash, you can't explain it by some external factor. Sure, dot-com crisis was set off by the fact that the stock prices of many companies, if you remember, who had never made a profit, weren't predicting that they could make a profit, but their stock prices were in the stratosphere, and it was very weird. Likewise, in 2008 and 9, we heard stories about all these people who got mortgages that they shouldn't have gotten because they couldn't afford to make the payments, et cetera, et cetera. And now we have a pandemic, a viral pandemic. Well, here's something that should not be hot news. Overpriced stocks have recurred in the history of capitalism countless times. Failures of large numbers of people to make mortgage payments have happened repeatedly in the history of capitalism. And viral pandemics are not new. The worst one in 1918, the Spanish flu, killed almost 700,000 people in the United States. A tremendous event in terms of the death and the destruction. And as recently as a dozen years ago, we had SARS, we had MERS, we had Ebola. Our scientific community, our medical community, and the history of our people is wrapped up in coping with, anticipating viral pandemics. We know that the problem is how they spread. We know that we have to control all of that. Just like we know that there are stocks that get wildly overpriced and that imposes a risk, and that mortgage financing is always risky, particularly when you give mortgages to people with subprime credit. Here's my point. Capitalism could have, should have, and if it were properly run, would have prepared for and been able to manage each and every one of those events, just like it was successful in managing them in days gone by. Calling them the crisis of the X is an attempt to divert attention from this question. Why was capitalism so incapable? Here in the United States, as you rightly say, extremely, but in other capitalist countries also to varying degrees. And that's the interesting question. And what does it tell us about capitalism? And if I can answer my own question real briefly. One,
please.
It gives the lie, for those who wanted to believe it, to Mr. Trump's endless repetition that we had the greatest economy in the world, the economy was in great shape. A great economy and one in great shape does not collapse when it is confronted by crises of this sort. It either has the resilience, it either has the capability, or it doesn't. And ours didn't. Okay, next final point. What was the problem? And here is the best that I can come up with. To prepare for a viral pandemic, to use the current one, everyone in the medical field says he and she knows exactly what you need. Earliest possible identification of the virus, immediately setting in motion the protective apparatus to deal with this recurring problem of a viral pandemic. What does that mean? It means accumulating, either producing or importing tests, ventilators, masks, gowns, beds, hospitals, trained personnel to use all of that equipment. These have to be produced and stockpiled, distributed according to the need, where the population centers are. All of this is very well known. So why wasn't it done? Answer: it is not profitable to produce huge numbers of masks and have them sitting in a warehouse. It is not profitable to stockpile beds. It isn't profitable to stockpile tests. Why not? Well, that's not how profit works. If you know how the system works, you want the money to turn over as fast as possible. You don't want have your value sit in some form for an indefinite length of time before you sell it, because in that time, your money isn't making money, and that makes you competitively unsuccessful within a capitalist framework. So nobody did it. Nobody produced these things and stockpiled them. Nobody imported them and stockpiled them. Nobody made sure that they were adequate to a rising population. None of them made sure they were distributed geographically in the ways that made sense given populations that were in close proximity to one another. We have a lower bed per person count than most of Western European countries by a lot and not by a little. We have had one governor after another, including Mr. Cuomo, who were proudly closing hospitals left and right in rural areas over the last many years, and not just in rural areas, in urban areas as well. Brooklyn has seen Brooklyn, New York, several hospital closings in the last 10 years, some of them directly closed by Mr. Cuomo. And I don't want to pick on him. It's just having become a hero overnight, there's a little bit of a strange piece of amnesia going on here. So in any case, what did the government do? Now, it's possible for a government to admit that the private profit system is a big, fat failure in coping with this crisis. and then to come in and to compensate for the private capitalist sector's failure by taking active steps. That is, the government could have purchased and stockpiled the tests, the ventilators, the masks, all of it. But they didn't, because in our capitalist system, and here you begin to see the difference between the United States on one hand, and Britain perhaps also, and Western Europe. And the difference is our government is proudly complicit with the ideology of private capitalism. It cannot get its head around the fact that private capitalism, in a way that I'm going to summarize in a moment, is a big fat failure here in the most profound sense and needs the government to come in and compensate for its failures. It can't say that. It can't say it because it grew up in the same ideological craziness that the CEOs did. Most government officials at the top are CEOs lent by the private sector to the public anyway. They go to the same schools. They hear the same lectures. I've been a professor in the schools where they go. I know the game. And so the government in this country, much worse than elsewhere, failed to compensate for the private sector. By the way, that's not just Mr. Trump. That's a mistake. That's Mr. Obama and Mr. Clinton and Mr. Bush, all of them, to varying degrees, of course, but they all did it. So we had a private failure compounded by a public failure ending up being complicit with the whole sorry mess. And here's the punchline. What, in this country, protecting us, preparing adequately, coping adequately with a viral pandemic, that's called public health. If there's any basic obligation of any economic system towards the people who live in it, it would have to include providing healthy food, providing decent shelter, and protecting the public health from endangering diseases and so on. Capitalism in the United States, the private sector and the government it owns, failed to do that. It is therefore, first and foremost, a failure of capitalism to perform at the basic function of protecting the public's health. And here's the irony of it all. What the private sector did and what the government allowed them to do was to make private profit. It was more profitable to do other things than to accumulate masks and tests and ventilators and all the rest of it. So they did what was profitable. And here's the big theoretical punchline. What was profitable was not what public health demanded. We have already lost many times the wealth that would have been spent to accumulate and locate the stockpiles of all the equipment we could ever have dreamed necessary. Therefore, there is no other conclusion than this. The fuck up, if you pardon my Spanish, that was performed here was an exercise in gross inefficiency. It was inefficient not to produce those medical supplies. It was inefficient not to stockpile them. Capitalism was efficient in producing profit and inefficient in protecting public health. Therefore, the claim that is contained in 99% of the textbooks of economics, that profit maximization is the royal road to efficiency, is now definitively proved wrong. The efficient thing to have done would have been to produce and stockpile the materials we needed for the coronavirus. Capitalism wasn't efficient in dealing with public health. Private profit maximization is not a mechanism that realizes efficiency. it was inefficient to pursue profit at the expense of the preparation. In other words, sorry for the long time to take it, but capitalism is the bad guy here. Capitalism is what messed up. Capitalism lies at the core of the failure of this economic system to minimally perform a basic requirement of any economic system, which is to protect public health. The answer, we didn't know this virus was coming, is either stupid or perverse, or maybe the achievement of our current leader is to combine both virtues in one human being. We did know it was coming. It has come before. Any prudent person, especially someone with even a little bit of ethical or moral commitment, understands that these viruses can be deadly, as they have been repeatedly in both 100 years ago and 5 years ago. There is no excuse. It's only a question of explaining, and the explanation leads to that capitalism doesn't perform adequately, and therefore the real question we're left with is, why the hell do the people of the United States accept a system that works this badly?
Well, that's what I want to actually, that's okay. So this is what I'd like to spend the next, 20 minutes or so talking about. There's a couple of things that have really struck me, and I thought of you specifically when they happened. One is just the very, basic thing that you could go and read a post by an epidemiologist or somebody who had some understanding of how these things worked. And they would say, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and nothing ideological, nothing from a particular standpoint, just a sort of, this is the strategy. And then you think to yourself, well, that's not going to happen because we know that, there isn't going to be stockpiles, as an example. We know there isn't going to be public supply chains or anything like that, right? And then what really hit me was watching Donald Trump with the CEO of Walgreens and CVS and thanking them. Mike Pence talking about vendors waiting for, and other administration officials talking about vendor innovation. And and it relates to, I really hate the liberal tendency to blame people, as it were. But I do think, I know you and I have talked about Gramsci on this show. We've talked about the hegemonic mood. And what is the relationship between what's happening here? Some of it is just rank corruption. I mean, you can poke around, it looks like Donald Trump has a personal financial stake potentially in some drug he's pushing, or what is Kushner's brother's healthcare company trying to get in on the grave. There's all this very basic venile stuff that you'd expect from these people. But then there's also just this broader buy-in that we can't seem to escape. We pass a bailout that consolidates capitalism and monopoly capital even further. And some people are beginning to step out. At 8:15, we're going to talk with an Amazon strike leader. People are engaging in rent strikes. There's things that are happening, but there still seems to be the overwhelming sense that even as this is literally murdering people, that we cannot step out of these ideological confines. And what is going to take for that? Because it seems to me that it's not just as simple as convincing people that things are wrong. I think people understand that, but it's the leap that things could potentially be better. How does that happen?
Well, I think the answer is, at least the answer that I get from history, is it's painful and it's frustrating, but the answer is you need to have a pretty consistent, constant accumulation of bits of evidence, of an experience over here, of a conversation with that person, of an overheard TV program, of whatever it is that begins to gel in your mind, that ways of thinking you believed before really don't work. And we know young people who reach a certain age and they grew up in a religious home and some many little things, and suddenly they can't go to church on Sunday anymore. They love their mother and father. They even like the music, but they can't buy in any. It's just they can't. Maybe on an earlier age, and I don't mean to be cute here, maybe when you're much younger, you go through a little mini catharsis where Rudolph, that reindeer with the red nose, you suddenly figure out that's a fable, that's a story. There really isn't, a reindeer like
Really?
that. Yeah, and there isn't the fat man in the red suit who comes down the chimney and puts the presents under the tree. It doesn't, and there are moments of sadness of giving that up. Those stories had meaning to you. This is not I don't take this lightly. This is heavy stuff in people's, but I think it's happening now. And let me tell you what I think is coming down the pike very soon, and is something that I hope programs like yours will engage. What we are going through now has a historical antecedent, and it may surprise you. The antecedent is the general strike. We are now experiencing a general strike, more powerful, better organized than any general strike I know of in history. Even those that had very sophisticated labor union organizations behind them. If I understand the numbers, we have 60 million people working in the United States, continuing to work. But our labor force is 150 million, which means 90 million people aren't doing their normal job. No general strike that I can imagine would have been that successful in getting out that many people. This system isn't working. Now, why do I think that's important? Because there's a growing movement, and it started with Mr. Trump about 10 days ago, and it is now gathering steam. A number of CEOs of major American corporations, including banks, have given interviews over the last 3 or 4 days, basically saying we must get people back to work. And the reason is that they've discovered a basic law of economics. Capital is not a thing. It's not a machine. It's not a factory. It's not an office. It's none of those things. It's a relationship. Because if you don't have a worker coming in to use it, then all that capital is worth nothing. The machine will function to gather rust and dust and serve maybe as a vehicle to hold a potted plant. It's useless. Labor is the key thing. And they're learning that, and they're understanding all their verbiage about how they're the leader and they're what makes it happen. It's very humbling. They are discovering that all those people who sweep, who work the machine, who open the door, who heat up the coffee, without them, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. Next point on the same issue. Pressing these people who are not working now because they're afraid to get sick, they're afraid to die, they're afraid to bring a virus home and kill the children and the spouse that are the closest to them. They're being told, fuck you, you're coming to work, and this is a lesson that is being drilled like a dentist drill into the minds, not the teeth, of the American working class, which is confronted with the demand. And you will be talking to the Amazon people. They said it too. You're not cleaning this place. You're not disinfecting this place. You're not giving us the social distancing that we're told is crucial to our well-being. You're not willing to spend the money. The nerve of Amazon to propose a few days ago that if 2 weeks is not enough paid leave for persons testing positive, then they would encourage other Amazon workers who have unused paid sick days to give them as a gift. Holy mackerel. The company will not take its profits to give its workers a healthy place. It confronts the general striking worker with a very powerful reason, either not to go back to work or to go back to work with a load of anger and bitterness. Even if it isn't conscious, it's right there. And the casual remark 1 week later from someone in his family who's starting to cough, who says, maybe I got it because you went back to work, Daddy. Whoa, you're going to see little mini catharses in a million American working class homes. And I would tell you, you could see a radical transformation. But here's the conundrum. Capitalism in America cannot go much longer without people being put back to work.
Right.
And capitalism can't go much longer if it forces people back to work. If you're screwed if you do it, and you're screwed if you don't do it, the bottom line says you're screwed. Capitalism is playing chess, and someone just said, checkmate. You're stuck. And how are you going to get out of it? And Mr. Trump, whatever his skills at BS, is going to have a hard time navigating this conundrum.
In the last couple of minutes, I just want to give you an image that has struck me recently that actually is exactly synchronized with Trump not being able to bullshit his way out of this, even as his negligence and just disgustingness has led to so many preventable deaths, along with, I mean, you mentioned Andrew Cuomo earlier. He just passed the budget to continue to cut Medicaid in New York State.
Right.
It's obscene. I mean, and people are, people are dying, and people are having, they don't know where their parents' body is right now. It's disgusting.
But again,
and they're being forced, as you say, to go into risk. We just talked about the UPS workers. They don't even have, forget even hand sanitizer, some bathrooms that don't even have soap. And they're the ones delivering everybody's necessary supplies during this. It's disgusting. And the image I just want to share with you, and take it whatever way you want, in whatever direction. But Bruno Latour wrote a book recently, the French philosopher of science.
Oh yeah, I know him well.
I loved this. I loved the book, but the title is what's really gotten me, which is this idea called Down to Earth. The idea that this whole project, he's focusing on globalization and neoliberalism, but I think we could expand it to capitalism, is a fantasy. There is no Earth that is infinite. There is no infinite market solution to everything. It's literally a collective fantasy life. And he was talking about climate. But obviously, this catastrophe serves as well, that we are going to be forced back down into terrestrial orbit by crises like this. And Donald Trump's bullshit and Hake's bullshit and Milton Friedman's bullshit and Amazon's bullshit is not going to get us out. They're going to make it worse. And maybe that's the kind of mental change you're talking about. Physical change.
Yeah, it's physical, but it is a mental. Look, if the workers don't go back to work and the employers tell them they have to, what happens then? These are the questions that you and I would not have thought worth discussing because they were so far in the future. And here we are, literally a few weeks since the last you and I spoke. And this is a sign. This is the way it happens. It's this. I think I quoted it on your program once. Lenin in Russia was asked, with the frustration of his comrades, why does it take so long to get out of the Tsar's rule here in Russia? It takes so long, nothing happens, nothing changes. And Lenin looked at the guy and he said, look, for many decades, nothing happens. And then in a matter of weeks, decades happen. There it is. We are now in a period of unspeakably rapid confrontation of long buried class struggles and recognitions and consciousness changes. We've not had workers thinking to themselves, the employer wants me to go back to work, but the employer hasn't taken any money to make the place safe. And even if he did, I don't trust him. How can I be sure tomorrow, next week, the week later, that these cleaning at night when I'm not here, we workers have to control that. We have to monitor that. Otherwise, we're at perpetual risk. These are situations that, look, I can't predict the future. Will they figure a way to slither out of this dead end they're in? Maybe. They've done it before. I have to admit it. You know, the old joke about the Marxists is they successfully predicted 10 of the last 4 downturns. You know, it's the old joke. But the truth of it is, I haven't seen this sharp a collection of dead ends and contradictions crammed into this space, and it's like a pressure cooker. Gary Cohn, the Goldman Sachs fellow who advised Trump, gave an interview a couple days ago. Here's what he's worried about. Millions of workers, he said, are becoming mentally unfit to come back to work. They're too depressed. He wants people to go back to work because he says a lot of these workers, if they're cooped up in their house for another several weeks, will not be okay to come back to work. He's talking about the mass impossibility. Now, he didn't say it was ideological, but I will. What he may mean is some sort of depression of a clinical sort. But he's also worried, whether he knows it or not, about another kind of mental shift that isn't depression, but is an attitude towards the workplace that is very dangerous for the people who sit at the top. All of that is going on at lightning speed in historical time while we're talking about it.
And that's an F-U, Gary Cohn mental shift.
Yes.
F-U.
Yes.
F-U, Jeff Bezos. And as a final question then, just to make it really specific, the kind of irony, paradox, whatever, of all of this stuff and reading Marx and thinking strategically, obviously there's a moral goal. There's an unimaginable amount of preventable and solvable suffering that we allow to happen because of these obscenities. But there's also just the strategic reality that while capital and, you know, they have everything in terms of money, power, the influence, the control, the institutions. But what does the great mass of people have that could stop the whole thing? Their labor power.
That's right. They have the right to refuse that labor power and in the process make a whole set of demands. Maybe a final thing I can give you is an idea of one of this kind of demand.
Please.
93+% of the private labor force in the United States, and the private sector is the major part of our economy, are not unionized. So let's talk about that 93%. Here's a demand. In every workplace, a committee, a workers' committee is set up, which has to have the following right: to monitor and supervise and control the health and safety of the workplace. It has to be cleaned, it has to be disinfected, it has to be managed in the right way. If the facility is too small for 6 foot apart work conditions, move it to a bigger facility, build one. The payment for that has to come from the corporate profits, and the control and supervision is done by the workers. If you don't give us that, we don't come back to work. Those committees, and in unionized places, let the union do it. Make the demand. That has to happen. Those committees will learn that what they're doing for a safe environment, they could and should be doing for every other dimension of the work experience: the wages, the climate conditions, the quality of the air, the availability of daycare. It's the beginning, but it's a structural beginning that cashes in on the immediate life and death concern that these workers will want that. They will want to have their own elected representatives responsible to them to make sure that what the employer failed to do, he cannot get away with failing to continue to do. And I think you could get an incredible movement behind this, and you would suddenly, and here's the joy of it, you would suddenly reorganize the American working class and compensate for, reverse the decline of organization that is the history of the labor movement in the last 50 years.
Incredible. Professor Wolff, I feel the energy, and I think we also need to feel grounded optimism here too.
Absolutely.
There is real possibility here.
It's often that way in history. Some of the worst moments are likewise, it's all Hegel's insight. They're likewise the moments of incredible opportunity. You want to limit the horror and you want to grab the opportunity.
Yes. And just, it's the conversations we've had about, the importance of the electoral realm and how to organize. I mean, these things are still very important, but this has opened up an entirely new terrain at a much more accelerated rate.
All right, we'll get together again soon and keep track of all this.
Stay safe.
Okay, you too, and have a good interview with that fellow from Amazon.
Yes, he's coming up shortly. Chris Smalls. Thank you, Professor Wolff.
Thank you.
You guys there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that actually, I think that was important for everybody.
For sure.
I think that was important.
That's classic Wolff, just crushing it there.
Classic Wolff.
Put some blood on my cheeks.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. I mean, it's incredible to think about the paradox of the moment like that, and again, we got to talk about the politics. We got to talk about how bad things are. We have to talk about the bailout that was passed. We have to talk about the incredible consolidation of corporate power in this country. And we can't have revolution fantasies. We can't go into cosplay. There is no time for any of that bullshit. And at the same time, there are these strikes. There is something there. I like the idea that if you could actually frame and consolidate, like if it goes from, I always thought that actually with student debt, that if everybody just said all of a sudden, like, well, it's not just that I'm personally, of course, like it's not a personal failing, but it isn't like, oh, I'm just not paying my debt and I'm getting harassed by these scumbags. If all of a sudden 10 million people just said no, the same thing is happening, but with a completely different political economic consequence.
Well, it's an old word, but it's class consciousness. It's literally the idea. I mean, that's what that is, right? Is when you start to recognize it's like, okay, there actually are divisions in society. There are certain people who are being affected in this way, and there are certain people who are being affected in a different way. And it starts to really materialize those kind of economic divisions. And hopefully the job of like socialists is to be able to take those divisions and actually put them into political divisions that, spur forward action. It's just like, it's been really incredible to talk to people all across the spectrum. And I think what's really clarifying about this crisis, and it's something similar to what happened after the 2008-09 crisis, but there are people who are sort of like, economically, they're more on the bottom of society. They have less in savings. They're being paid less, etc. But then there's those people on the cusp, and those people are the ones who sort of oftentimes they sort of flip toward capital, or they flip toward the status quo, right? Because they think, oh, things are going somewhat well for me. I might not be rich or very comfortable, but I think I'm getting there. This is a moment economically for those folks that they're starting to realize, actually, you know what? I actually have a lot more in common with the grocery store workers and the Amazon workers than I do with my boss or the bankers or that part of the population.
Right. I think that this is all really, really, really important stuff. And we're going to get to, do you want to see, we're a few minutes early, but maybe we could see if Chris is ready, because we only have
I'll tell him to hop on when he's ready.
If he can hop on when he's ready, maybe we can get a few extra minutes because I do want to talk. I mean, this is the exact translation what Chris Smalls is doing with Amazon. Mm-hmm. And also, let's keep reinforcing. I mean, this is why I wanted to, when I got reached out by those Teamsters in Philadelphia, like we need to, if we have the capacity, the concrete expression of what David is talking about is helping that GoFundMe as an example. That's the tangible corollary of realizing that there are these fundamental class conflicts and that actually a really broad set of people are in this together. Mm-hmm. That's actually really important, and not in some kind of vague sentimental way, but in a very tangible way. You have more in common with somebody dealing with UPS than you do with Jeff Bezos, even if you're really relatively quite comfortable.
Looks like we got him.
Sorry?
Looks like we got him when you guys are ready.
We got him?
Yep.
Yeah, well, let's go.
All right, here we go. Okay. He's connecting now.
He's connecting now.
I think.
I don't see him yet, but
yeah, 1 second.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I just admitted him, so let's see here.
Yeah, it takes a second. It's all right.
Do you want to take a little break, maybe?
Yeah, let's take a 30-second break. We'll be right back in 30 seconds. 30 seconds, 1 minute. We'll be right back. Let's get him on. We'll be right back.
Live.
Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Michael Brooks here. It's a great honor, pleasure to welcome Chris Smalls. He is organizing Amazon workers. Chris, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm great, man. I'm hanging in there, fighting a good fight, man.
You are
a good fight.
Can you take us through this process that began? I just want to top line 3 quick things and then take us through it. The floor will be yours. So,
sure.
Amazon and Whole Foods have done next to nothing. That's my editorial to protect their workers during this pandemic. Chris responded to that. First, by asking some very basic questions about safety protocols, and then starting to kind of organize the workforce. And we've also gotten a report in the last several days that not only did this, that this has gotten pushback from the highest levels of the company, including Jeff Bezos. So, Chris, can you take it from there?
Sure. Well, yeah, as you all know, March 30th, I started a revolution. I'll take you back to how it started. March 24th, I returned to work after taking a couple of days off. Obviously, raising concerns within that building because I've seen some of my colleagues and employees fall ill and a domino effect. And it was very alarming, very scary. And I raised concerns in the building to the HR team saying like, hey, something's wrong here. We need to quarantine the building. They were very nonchalant about it. As you can tell, this country, we're playing catch up because our chief and commander is catching up. So the company was doing the same thing. We wasn't prepared. We wasn't taking it serious, but I was. I was very aware and adamant about the safety and the well-being of my employees, especially working with these people 40, 50 hours a week. This is my extended family, been with the company since 2015. So, March 24th, I came to work because I needed a check to pay my rent. And my colleague, who's on the same level as me, a process assistant, which is similar to an assistant manager, she was sick. Her eyes were bloodshot, puffy. She was fatigued. And I was like, yeah, you need to go home. It's 9:00 in the morning. She was like, yeah, I'm sick. I went for testing last night. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you definitely need to go home. As you know, you don't even get the test unless you're showing severe symptoms. So I was like alarmed that she was even there in the building to begin with, after being there all week around hundreds of employees for 10 hours a day. So thank God I came there on my overtime day, which is not even my normal schedule, and sent her home. They forgot to leave that part out. But yeah, that's the truth. 2 hours later, we had a small managers meeting, which we have every day, called the sync meeting. And that's when we learned about our first confirmed case. The associate was in the building on March 11th. It's the 24th though, so they were pretty much nonchalant about it. They were like, hey, he's not here. He hasn't been here for a number of days in a row. I didn't give a damn, excuse my language, but I was like, hey, The Queens building in New York, they closed down. They had one confirmed case. They closed down. They send everybody home with pay, and they sanitize the building. I was expecting that. It didn't happen. That was my last time working for Amazon right there. I walked out the building at 12 o'clock. The person I drive to work with, who they didn't quarantine, by the way, we both left. And we both went home. And that's how I started mobilizing and thinking of ways I can get these people out of that building. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you already have a sense before this that this was something that you wanted to do in terms of overall work conditions at Amazon?
No, I was just being a concerned human being. I had no idea none of this would transpire to where I'm at now. I was just a regular person, a regular father of 3. And I was concerned, and I was just trying to save people's lives. I didn't want this virus to go home to their families. You know, I came back to the building every single day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, up until Saturday when they quarantined me. And I sat in that cafeteria for 8 hours a day, explaining and telling the truth to the employees because they deserve to know it. And I told them, like, hey, you've been working around somebody that tested positive. And we walked into the general manager's office every morning, interrupting his meetings in groups of 10, trying to close that building down. And I got nowhere. I got a bunch of running around all week. They helped orchestrate me sitting these people in the cafeteria, lying to them, telling them I'm going to come address them. They never did any of that. They never warned me multiple times. They knew exactly what I was doing. And then they quarantined me just because they wanted to silence me. You know, I think they were annoyed about what I was doing. And then it was like, hey, you did come in contact with her. You had to be quarantined. I was like, yeah, I know I did. I told you guys that when she tested positive on Wednesday. I knew. I told you guys that. You guys told me y'all was going to call me over the phone or email me, which didn't make any sense. But now you're telling me in person I'm quarantined? Okay, fine. But what about the employees? What about the person I ride to work with? No, just you. So what does that tell everybody? You know?
Right.
So
what else have they done in response? And where were you at when you got the news that there was a leak of a meeting where they were talking about undermining you personally at the very highest levels?
I was home, you know. I've been in here talking to the world. You know, when I found out, I received the email early in the morning before the press even got a hold of it. Now we all know what these people are. You know, thank you. Whoever leaked it, thank you. You know, you did us all a favor, not just me. I'm not going to stoop down to that level. You know, I put a statement out there already, and all I can say is we all know who Jeff Bezos is now. We all know who he has around him, whether he said it or not. You know, you can imagine the type of conversation they really have about minorities. And that says enough, you know. It's never going to be Amazon versus Chris Smalls. It's going to be Amazon versus the people. So they're going to have to answer to all of us.
Talk about that process now. There's the boycott happening. The organizing has continued. How is that playing out, both from the perspective of the workers, your fellow workers, and also from people like us who, you know, honestly, I mean, this is not a big ask to not use Amazon for a week. This is not a big ask.
Absolutely. And that's, I started a revolution. I'm getting calls from all around the world, Germany to Tokyo, Canada, Australia, Italy, Sweden. You name it, I got emails from associates all around the world. They feel empowered now because they're dealing with the same situation. So I might have sparked the fuse of a revolution, and I'm all supported of the unions that's organizing against them because we got to take the power back. And as you just stated, yes, you want to practice real social distancing, stop clicking the button. You saving lives. We don't need Amazon. It's not a necessity. You got to think about humanity right now. We all should have one common goal, and that's to defeat COVID-19. And Amazon is a breeding ground for the coronavirus. We got to shut it down.
What about after it? We defeat it. We recognize Amazon's total recklessness in this, but we also can see that it connects to a broader set of policies of how Amazon treats its workers. And in this, I mean, and how a bunch of companies, I mean, we were talking about UPS workers earlier and so on. This isn't, you know, this is about big business in general, but Amazon plays such a powerful and unique role in our lives, from holding the servers of podcasts to CIA information to its workforce at factories across the globe to its kind of deep knowledge of all of us. What is like the bigger picture demand? First, stop the crisis. First, hold the company accountable. But then we as consumers, everybody as workers, to make a completely different set of demands on Amazon overall.
This can never happen again. It shouldn't happen in the first place. It still shouldn't be happening, but it is. This can never happen again. You can't allow. I've got people sleeping in their cars right now, working for the richest man in the world. That doesn't even make sense. I got people that's been unpaid for an entire month and still going because they're afraid to go to work. Amazon hires from 16 or 18 all the way up till, you want to retire, or even after you retire, senior citizens. These people can't go to work. Their parents are telling these young kids, don't go to work. You're not bringing that virus back home. And these senior citizens have underlying health conditions, or their immune systems are not strong enough to go to work. They're unpaid right now. The company's throwing money towards PR. We want to show commercials about, sending out PPE and temperature taking. It's all reactive. It's all Band-Aid work. It's all fabricated, sugar-coated. That's not the reality of the situation. People are getting sick and bringing this virus home to their families. I know people that lost grandparents already.
Yep. And
this company don't give a damn.
No, they've spent more time figuring out how to smear you.
Right. Good luck.
What about your friends and people that led this first act of, and look, just real courage. Let's be honest. Like, thank you, and let's honor that.
Thank you.
Where are people that you were concerned about personally? Where is the state of their health now?
It's hard because they need money and they want to take the stance with me. They haven't been going to work. They're trying to hold off as long as they can. And eventually they're going to run out of money. We're down to our last pennies. I don't even have a job right now myself. So I do have a donation, GoFundMe up, and I'm going to give that money to them, because it was never about money for me. This is for them. And I'm going to give that money, whoever donates, I'm going to make sure that I pay the people that's in the building. And we have a national strike with the organizers across the nation. I'm getting more information about that because I want I want to have, say into how it's distributed to make sure that the right people get the money. And that's what I'm working on right now behind the scenes.
In the last couple of minutes, please just tell us all of the concrete ways. It sounds really simple, as I keep saying out of the gate. Don't use Amazon for a week. But what can people do to try to synchronize as many of our efforts as possible and really, and make sure that this situation changes and in a durable way for the future?
Sure. Well, let me tell the people the scary thing. Maybe I got to scare them or enlighten them at least. It's 500,000 employees nationwide for Amazon. It's 800,000 employees worldwide. This virus spreads to 2.5 people. Take your calculator out. Do the math. That should wake you up right there. God forbid, we all become carriers of COVID-19. God forbid. You're talking about ending humanity. So that should wake you up. You want to, like I said, you want to practice real social distancing. Stop that one-click buy. What was you doing 20 years ago? Going to the grocery store, right? Why can't we revert back to old society? No problem with doing that. Force these billionaires to throw that money towards not the food pantry, but the medical field. That's who needs it right now. Those are the real heroes. You want hospitals? JFK 8, Staten Island holds 14 NFL football fields. There's your hospital, New York. There's Amazons in every city and every state, almost, if not already. There's your hospitals. We got to wake up.
Where can people support the GoFundMe?
On my Twitter page, shut_down Amazon.
Chris Smalls, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Anytime,
Seriously.
brother.
Thank you.
Anytime. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Be well. We'll talk to you soon, hopefully.
Absolutely. You too.
All right. Good night. All right, folks. That's it. There it is. And what's so incredible is like the risk is so enormous. The man does not have a job right now. That's terrifying. Anybody who's been in that sort of situation in any way, let alone not in a pandemic, being unemployed, not having a source of income is fucking terrifying. Jeff Bezos and these other motherfuckers are figuring out how to attack him and keep everybody unsafe so they can keep up hyper exploitation of their workers. And I mean that in a very technical sense. Like exploitation in Marxist terminology just describes basically a relationship between labor and capital. So you can be exploited actually in a pretty nice way in certain circumstances. In the Amazon warehouses are hyper exploitation always, right? Those are the stories about monitoring how people use the bathroom and all of these horrifying, intricate timing systems and all of this stuff. And the man does not want his colleagues to die of a fucking pandemic and would also like to not contribute it to the broader public. And it requires this level of heroism on his part to just do that, let alone the other big picture things that we need to do. The asks relative to the barbarism of that company are extraordinary. And there's nothing exceptional about it. It's not that Amazon, yes, Amazon actually arguably does have a more kind of brutal work culture than other companies in some respects. You can get into it. But this is not an Amazon problem. This is a hyper capitalism problem or a big business problem, whatever. I'm less attached to the jargon. But just really, really, really reflect on his asks relative to the risk, relative to the company response.
Yeah, and let's also remember too that Amazon has really concentrated. Like, I mean, I might be wrong about the numbers, but something like half of American households have an Amazon Prime account. I mean, Amazon has really captured like the United States economy and distribution system, and it's run it's just like it's run on that kind of brutal exploitation, and we should not forget it. It's something that is just it's there. And so many people don't see it, and it's really inspiring that people are starting to push back. And it's something that we've been saying for a little while too. In crisis, at the bottom of the situation, there's also huge opportunity because this is where workers have a tremendous amount of power.
Let me just read. I actually just happened to drop on the Discord, so I'm going to just read this. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. This
is what was leaked about the memo, about the meeting, apparently. And this has not been denied, okay, as far as I understand. This is David Sapolsky, Amazon's general counsel. Speaking of the gentleman we just interviewed, he's not smart or articulate. And to the extent the press wants to focus on us versus him, we will be in a much stronger PR position than simply explaining for the umpteenth time about how we're trying to protect workers. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what you just heard. I mean, on what planet is that guy not clear? Clear-spoken person who doesn't want he or his colleagues to die. Now, not everybody has gone to an Ivy League college. Not everybody has been trained in different rituals of how to speak so you appear smart, even though you're a sociopathic mediocrity like this fucking general counsel. Not even to mention the obvious race shit that you can read into that. So this is what they're thinking about. They're thinking about how can we demonize somebody who is risking everything so people don't die as PR spin.
Mhm.
And Jeff Bezos was at that meeting. And I'm not going to get too far off on this hobby horse, but I don't look. Yes, there's some good reporting and some good work in the Washington Post. There's also a lot of horrible work in the Washington Post. But I don't want to hear any more fucking, well, do you got to appreciate Jeff Bezos against Trump? No, they're all part of the same pathology.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
It's disgusting. Disgusting. It's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been saying that Trump clearly has a secret crush on Jeff Bezos if we go through this and we don't nationalize Amazon. So come on, Trump.
Disgusting. All right. David Griscom.
Yeah, man.
We're in a Corona situation, so we can't have Richard Wolff overview and course correct your work. I guess that's an upside of being in a pandemic, huh?
I guess so. I think Wolf's on my side. Yeah,
I think Wolff is very political. It's time for the gem. Let's do it.
Yeah, so I want to start on the. We're actually going to loop back to sort of the fight and what we were just talking about with Chris Smalls, but I want to sort of start at the ridiculous. And I wanted to talk about sort of how this crisis has been affecting, I don't know, I guess I'll call it the enthusiastic side of the economy. Companies like WeWork, all of these companies that had no path to profitability, they were just pumped up by just very enthusiastic investors for a long time. And SoftBank, who is one of the major players in this world, has actually just been sued by WeWork. Because remember when all this stuff went on with WeWork and their when they were going public and their CEO turned out to just be a complete lunatic, and their stock just dropped and everyone sort of backed away. SoftBank came in and saved the company with this massive bailout. Well, now that SoftBank is being hit with this crisis, SoftBank is now backing out of supporting WeWork to the tune of $3 billion. Let's also remember, too, that SoftBank is very, very involved in a lot of these kind of Silicon Valley tech companies, a lot of these companies that have really no path to profitability and just has continued to pump money into them. We'll come back to why that's a problem in a second. And also, let's not forget, too, that SoftBank is very much involved with Saudi Arabia, specifically with their Vision Fund. So we've seen over the past 2 days the Dow go up and down. There was a very excited moment on Monday where a lot of folks were thinking that the crisis is finally over. Well, those gains have already been erased today. Nobody knows what's going on. The least of which the least knowledgeable people in our society are definitely going to be people who are buying and selling stocks today. Now, I wanted to hit this because we have been talking about, or I've been talking about during these gems for the past 2 years, how much of the economy is pumped up by cheap money and just enthusiastic investment that's completely divorced from production. And what Richard Wolff was talking about during the interview earlier is exactly right. They're realizing that, what? We can have all the money that we want. We can have all the ownership of all these systems as we want. If the labor isn't there, then we don't own anything. Right. And you're starting to see all of those people who have been able to float on unprofitable kind of just like almost, honestly, just schemes. They're starting to get worried. Okay, well, how am I going to get my money? So you've seen this contraction in the market. And it's important that the United States government has fixated so much on going to big business first and bailing out big business first, because this is going to be the way that we restructure our economy going forward. Are we going to live in a society? It's hard to imagine, but could we live in a society where there's even more concentration of wealth with these massive corporations? It could be very likely. The small business bailout that this last package put forward has been an unmitigated disaster. In the first iteration of it, basically, we went through banks instead of the government actually going directly to small business. Because
did I not say that? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I mean, anybody could have called it like, the small business fund. It goes through Citi. Sure.
And let's give them a little bit of just like for our own exploration. Let's just take them at the word. The reason they said that they did that is because there's no government apparatus to do it. Well, why is that? Because for the past few decades, we have completely demolished and destroyed any kind of government programs that are just focused on giving development and aid to average people, right? There are no institutions meant to do that because they've been destroyed systematically over decades of neoliberalism. So when this first started, you had the only people who were getting, these are small businesses, and they're saying small business is any business with less than 500 employees. So it's quite a large scope, right?
Yeah.
But the people who ate first there, as we talked about last week, were people who already had significant financial relationships with those banks. So the small businesses who were basically the elites of the small businesses, they came and they were able to get their loans first. Now they're trying and they're scrambling to try to get some kind of a solution to this problem. I know the Federal Reserve is trying to jump in. I just think it's very important that we realize that every day that we do not get this aid to these small businesses, businesses get shuttered down forever. Every day that we do not get aid to these small businesses, people who need funds right now, today, yesterday, do not get to eat. Even this kind of stimulus that's supposed to be going to everyday Americans, it seems like that's going to take forever to get to most people, right? And we got to realize that we're seeing so clearly the inequality in our system. The Financial Times put out a survey that they conducted today that found 73%, nearly, which is around 3/4 of Americans, say that the pandemic has already reduced their families' incomes. And this is where it gets really worrying. Nearly half of those people saying they would be without any income at all if they were unable to work because of illness. This is the reality that we're facing. This is almost the majority population of the United States of America that is being, one, untouched by the aid that's coming from the federal government, and two, is in such a precarious position. Again, something that's been created by the complete devastation of work, that everyone is working in these kind of informal jobs, part-time jobs, informal jobs, that we don't have any kind of institutions to reach people. Let's not even mention all the undocumented workers, precarious workers, and people working in the informal economy who are certainly being left behind right now. And so here we are. We're in this moment right now, and I think that we should see what the crisis is and also see where there's opportunity. The Financial Times editorial board put out an op-ed earlier last week that said the virus lays bare the frailty of the social contract. Right? And it's a very interesting essay to read. I just want to read a quick couple lines from it because you'd almost think it was coming from a more radical left-wing publication. Much as the struggle to contain the pandemic has exposed the unpreparedness of health systems, so the brittleness of many countries' economies has been exposed. Governments will have to accept a more active role in the economy. They must see public services as investments rather than liabilities and look for ways to make labor markets less insecure. Redistribution will, again, be on the agenda. We are seeing capital on the ropes. It is recognizing that it can rig the system to its own benefit as much as it wants. But at the end of the day, without having the labor power, without having the access to the workforces that they are reliant on, having all the money, having all of the access to credit doesn't matter. So they're trying to find ways to lobby the government to come in and fix this problem, right? And we should welcome that. We want the government to come in. We want these social programs to come in and help people. But we need to realize that there are people who are now coming in who want to create a situation where people are basically held afloat for the next couple of months. And then after all of this devastation, everything becomes cheap. And they can actually gobble up more and more and more. Who's going to be the winners and losers of this situation are going to be people who have access to credit. And we need to be making sure that money is going to working class people as much as possible. And also utilizing our incredible leverage in this moment. We are in a situation where we could see a massive reshuffling of power in our society. And the people on the top of the society are already 2-3 steps ahead of us. And we need to be moving as quickly as possible and as being bold as possible because they are already prepared to make concessions. We're just not asking for it loudly enough yet. And we need to be supporting people who are on the ground in those fights because we have all the power and all the leverage right now to really break a significant stranglehold over our lives by these people on the top have held for decades on decades now.
Absolutely. Yep, that's exactly right. All right, folks, here's what we're going to do. We'll retweet the links to how you can support the Teamsters and how you can support Chris Smalls. These are things that if you can do, we strongly encourage you do. These are, the most important sites of action right now. I will say, again, if you're in a position right now to become a patron, do so. We need to keep, going at this time, obviously, and keep, moving full speed ahead. Obviously, we're in a relatively lucky position. So, if you need a deal, obviously we'll help you out. And, and we're going to be unlocking more content for people who absolutely, just want to engage more with the show. We're going to be unlocking more. We just actually unlocked the first part of the Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste 2-part conversation with Joshua Kahn Russell, which I think is incredible. And I would really strongly recommend it to everybody. So we'll keep doing more of that. If you're watching this, please make sure to smash the like button and definitely hit subscribe. Go through our archive and go to patreon.com/TMBS. Also check out Matt's Literary Hangover. This Friday, I'm hosting a Jacobin event on Jacobin's YouTube channel, which you should go and subscribe to, with Adolph Reed and others on Bernie and the myth of the African-American vote, which I'm very excited about and honored to do. Obviously, I think Adolph Reed is somebody that everybody needs to be reading and thinking about right now. And then on Saturday, and there will be more information, but I'll just say on Saturday, Anna Kasparian and I are going to be hosting a show for Jacobin. It's going to be called Weekends with Anna Kasparian and Michael Brooks. And it's going to be debuting this weekend. And again, this is a show you can watch on the Patreon, on the YouTube channel of Jacobin, and that's it. That's the show. It's not, it's not like TMBS and other models. Ultimately, obviously, there'll be, other ways. Obviously, you can always become like a Jacobin subscriber, but that's, straightforward. It's a new show. Obviously, it's going to be related to other things that we talk about and cover. But obviously, it's going to have a different flavor and be a new synthesis for both of us. We've been looking forward to doing something together for quite some time and excited to be doing it. So folks, patreon.com/TMBS if you can. And I want to thank everybody across the board, obviously. And I just, stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you shortly in the post game.